Hi, this is Marcus Toole, and it is April 18th, 2018. Actually, it's April 8th, 2018, and I'm in my home orchard. And I'm actually here next to the huckleberry bushes. I did a video yesterday while it was raining. As you can see, the day is beautiful. It's cool. It's been a very cool spring, and that's going to be one of the subjects of my conversation here. It has been a cool spring, but fortunately, unlike last year, this year we did not get a hard enough late freeze to destroy the fruit, and so I have a really good crop. This bush that I'm showing right here is the dotty huckleberry bush. I've named this. This is really just a wild huckleberry bush that I've moved to the yard along with all the others. Just that this one has grown remarkably well and produces remarkably well, and it's the very earliest one. It's already trying to ripen berries in onesies and twosies, and of course what happens this time of year while they're ripening at that pace, the bird gets every single berry, but eventually they're going to just ripen as a herd, and we'll get a good crop of huckleberries, and they'll just overwhelm the birds, especially since there's just a whole bunch of plants of them. This is the species here is Vaccinium elioti, which I think is a fine early blueberry for a home orchard in southeast Georgia. Next to it is one that I'm not as enthusiastic about in terms of fruit flavor or anything. I have it more as a curiosity. This is a Vaccinium tenellum, a clusterberry. They make big, pretty berries. They just, I don't think they're the most tasty blueberries, and cultivating it seems to help productivity most years, although this year, this one doesn't have much on it. I have two other plants of this in the back of the yard that are much fuller of berries. The berries get bigger with cultivation. Maybe they taste a little better, but I still think that they're kind of tasteless. Now, this one here is a blueberry that anyone in the South that grows berries or knows about blueberries should know. This is our commercial blueberry, the rabbit-eye blueberry that grows down here in the South. This particular one actually began on the window plantation, I'm assuming as a seedling that the birds planted. There's a population of blueberry bushes, and this one is actually unique from the others that I got from that from Winlow, insofar as this one, the berries, while they're still green, are kind of pinkish. There are a few cultivated varieties that are like that, but this one is clearly genetically distinct and earlier than the other ones that are that came from the Winlow plantation. We have more huckleberries, and most of the mature plants have really large crops on them. This is actually a young dotty that I planted in this location just this winter. Some other young huckleberry bushes that I brought in last winter, and you know, once again, the bushes, all the bigger bushes, just about have very handsome loads of huckleberries on them of various sizes and qualities. They're wild bushes, so they're, you know, they are what they are. I want to talk about the pears just for a minute. The pear trees are doing way better than they did last year as a whole. This is Southern Bartlett, and it has a really good crop on it. I mean, I'm very pleased with the crop. I don't think it's too badly overloaded. At one point I was afraid I was going to have to thin it, but I think it did enough thinning of it on its own that most of the limbs are not badly overloaded. The other thing I'll say about it is that it's growing better than it has in a long time. Usually this tree will get a little bit of fire blight, and a lot of the new growth will kind of get yacked off, and then it just kind of looks messy and ugly through the season. And this year that has not happened. I've had a little bit of fire blight trouble on another tree, the golden boy, but this tree seems to be doing well this year. And it's just funny how it is that on a year where you would expect fire blight problems because it's been a cool spring, a lot of misty days, but not a whole lot of rain. You would expect this to be the kind of weather you'd really have troubles, but I really haven't with this tree. But I have had a little bit of trouble with a different tree. Let's go look at the plums. The plums are pretty exciting. This is Mariana, and as you can see, Mariana is a large tree. The variety is used more as rootstock for European plums than as a fruit tree. And in fact, if you read literature on it, most people will say that it's not a very productive tree. And indeed, as long as I had a green gauge, it produced some fruit, but never a lot of fruit. And then last year, last winter before last, my green gauge died. And then last year, this didn't produce any fruit at all. And then this year, I brought hog plums, which is a close relative of one of the, see, Mariana is a hybrid between the Munson plum, which is a North American species from Kentucky and northern Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, that part of the country, and a plum that's from Russia, a cherry plum that's from Russia and eastern China, yeah, western China, and is not, you know, supposedly has fertility issues, but we have a plum that's native to southeast Georgia. It's very close relative to the Munson plum, which is one of the parents, called the hog plum. And so I just brought some flowers of hog plums into the orchard to see how that would affect the productivity of Mariana. And as you can see, this year I have a bumper crop. So there are two things I know about Mariana. One, based on my experience, is that contrary to what some people say, Mariana is not self-fertile. I don't think it's self-fertile at all. But also contrary to what people want to say is that Mariana actually produces a fair amount of fruit if you have a good pollinizer from it. It's just that the European plum, I don't think, I mean, it did the job somewhat. When I say the European plum, I mean the green gauge that died. But it doesn't do the job that the hog plum did. And this tree, I mean, the plums aren't super close together, but they're going to get a lot bigger. And the tree is full on all parts of it. And I think I'm going to have, once they're fully mature, there's going to be a ton of plums on this tree. I also brought wild Chickasaw plums into the orchard, and that has created a bumper crop on my Robusto plum. This is Robusto plum. Robusto plums called Robusto because the individual plums are pretty big. Robusto is well over a month away from ripening, and the plums are already, let's see, let's get out a measuring tape. So here's a couple of plums here. So right at an inch long, and they'll be the end of May, early June before they're ripening, and these plums are going to be quite big. Another plum that was pollinated by the wild plums, the wild Chickasaw plums, was Toole's Heirloom. And once again, I showed this yesterday too. These plums aren't quite as big, but they also aren't quite as close to being ripe either. This tree doesn't ripen its fruit until late June. When I was a kid, we always had plums on my birthday at June 23rd. So that's about when these ripen, June 23rd. And sometimes would have had plums on the tree up until maybe even early July some years. So this is, I have to give a shout out to Jane Page, who is pastor of the local UU church, because she let me gather some of the wild Chickasaw plums off her property. In fact, I gathered the flowers from her property, but I also gathered young trees, and this is one of them. This is actually a sucker from that one that's part of its root. let's see, am I actually getting the picture of the, there it is. Some young plums off her property, which hopefully will provide pollen for my plums in future years. Another addition to, as far as plums to the orchard this year is I have added a Munson plum. I had the idea of the Munson plum being a source of pollen for the Mariana plum, but I can already tell this is going to bloom way too late, and I've even talked to others and people who have had that same notion, and it blooms too late. So it's not going to work for that. I did graft another Munson plum into that tree. I got Cyanwood same time I got the tree, and so it will bear fruit as long as the grafts stay alive, and I have two different genetic strains of Munson. I'm going to come over here. This is another tree I added. This is actually the rootstock to this little guy is Toole's Heirloom, and one little trunk that's coming up I have grafted Odom onto, and the other little trunk, the one to the right, I have grafted Guthrie. These are two Chickasaw type plums. They'll be somewhat similar to Toole's Heirloom. The Odom will ripen its fruit in late June, around the same time Toole's Heirloom does, and the Guthrie will ripen its fruit in early June. This right here is another little plum, two different ones. One going one way is this one right here is the Odom again, and this one right here is a little plum called Excelsior. Now there are two kinds of Excelsior plums I have learned, and this is not. This Excelsior, the jury is very much out as to whether it will take our climate long term. I bought it, in fact the tree I bought is over here, and it is actually a hybrid. It is not a Chickasaw type plum. And I thought it was the Excelsior that is a Chickasaw type plum, but it's not. There's no way that this is a Chickasaw type plum. And not only is it a hybrid, but it's not even a hybrid with Chickasaw. It is a hybrid with the American plum. And American plum hybrids are just notorious for being sterile with other hybrid plums and with all other plums except for pure wild American plum trees. And so and the university that did that research originally determined that is the University of Saskatchewan, and I actually called them and talked to Rick Sawowski this week, and actually emailed him and had an email exchange and asked him if he thought that this would be cross fertile with the with my wild Chickasaw plums, and he assured me that he thought there was a 95% probability that it would be. The Chickasaw is close enough, the Chickasaw plum is close enough to the American plum that it will pollinate this just fine. But of course said for me to let him know if this thing lives long enough to bloom and bloom with the Chickasaws, if it bears pollen, if it bears fruit, the Chickasaws are what would have caused it. This is another one of the little Chickasaw plums that I transplanted from Jane Page's orchard to pollinize that tree, as well as this sort of multi-variety tree that I've created, which is root stock or root growth suckers from the very original, or a fairly close original. This is the remains of the tree that I had planted from my aunt of Toole's Heirloom, which I grew from the stump growth, or actually not stump growth, but from the root sucker from the original tree that my dad got of Toole's Heirloom and put in our yard at the house that I grew up in. So, and I have grafted all kinds of different Chickasaw type plums into this, and in fact this part of the tree is all Robusto, and so because I wanted to see how Robusto would act on a Toole's Heirloom root. If it still looks like a little tiny you know, peach tree size tree, or if it becomes a big tree like Toole's Heirloom. It's looking like it's going to be the latter. It looks like it's going to be kind of a small tree, whereas these others with the other grafts on it are getting bigger. Anyway, this is Marcus. I could talk for a long time about my fruit, but I will say for now, good day. This is getting long enough. God bless.